The dust hung thick in the August heat of 1877 when Victoria Ashford heard the cellar door slam shut above her head, followed by the unmistakable sound of a wooden beam being wedged against it. She dropped the jar of preserves she had been retrieving for her aunt, the glass shattering across the earthen floor as her hands flew to the ladder. 3 rungs up, she pushed against the door with all her strength, but it would not budge. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she called out, her voice echoing in the confined space that smelled of potatoes and damp soil. "Let me out, please," Victoria shouted until her throat burned, but no answer came. She knew who had done this. Her cousin's husband, Dale Pritchard, had been making threats ever since she had witnessed him stealing from her uncle's store 2 days prior. He had cornered her that morning, his breath reeking of whiskey, and told her that women who could not keep their mouths shut needed to learn their place. She had pushed past him then, but now she realized she should have told someone, should have warned her aunt and uncle. The darkness pressed in as the afternoon light faded through the cracks in the door above, and Victoria sank down onto the dirt floor, wrapping her arms around herself. The first night was the worst. Every sound made her jump, from the scurrying of mice to the creaking of the wood above her head. She had no water, no food except for the raw potatoes and carrots stored in bins around her. The air grew cold as the sun set, and she huddled in the corner, her thin cotton dress providing little warmth. She thought of her parents, lost to fever 3 years ago, and how she had come to North Platte, Nebraska, to live with her mother's sister. She thought of the life she had been building here, working in her uncle's general store, saving money to perhaps open a dress shop one day. Now all of that seemed impossibly far away. By the second day, thirst consumed her. She licked the moisture from the walls where condensation had formed, the taste of earth and mold coating her tongue. Her lips cracked and her head pounded. She tried again and again to force the door open, throwing her weight against it until her shoulders were bruised and her strength gave out. Victoria prayed, wept, and prayed some more. She wondered if Dale had told her aunt and uncle that she had run off, or if they were searching for her. The town was small, but there were miles of prairie in every direction where a person could disappear. On the 3rd day, Victoria could barely move. She lay on the ground, drifting in and out of consciousness, her thoughts becoming strange and disconnected. She dreamed of water, of her mother's cool hand on her forehead, of vast open skies. The darkness had become absolute, as if she had been buried alive. She no longer had the strength to call out. Time lost all meaning in that black void beneath the earth. She did not hear the horse approaching outside, or the footsteps of the man who had been tracking signs around the property for the past hour. Franklin Everett had arrived in North Platte 3 days ago, trailing a horse thief who had stolen a prize mare from a ranch outside Cheyenne. The thief's path had gone cold near the Ashford property, and Franklin had been methodically searching the area. He was a tracker and bounty hunter, 26 years old and weathered beyond his years from a life spent outdoors. His dark hair hung past his collar, and his blue eyes were the color of a winter sky. He had been doing this work since he was 18, after his father's ranch had been taken by the bank, and his mother had died of heartbreak. Franklin noticed the fresh scratches on the cellar door, the way the dirt had been disturbed around it. Something made him pause, some instinct honed by years of reading the land and the signs people left behind. He dismounted from his buckskin gelding and approached the cellar, pressing his ear to the wood. At first, he heard nothing. Then, so faint he almost missed it, came a sound like a sigh or a whimper. "Anyone down there?" he called out, his deep voice steady. No response came, but that faint sound continued. Franklin did not hesitate. He grabbed the wooden beam wedged against the door and threw it aside, then pulled on the handle. The door was stuck, swollen from moisture and age. He braced his boot against the frame and pulled harder, muscles straining. The wood groaned and then gave way with a crack that split the door partially down the middle. The smell that rose from below made him step back, a mixture of rot and human misery. Franklin peered into the darkness, waiting for his eyes to adjust. At the bottom of the ladder he could just make out a crumpled form. "Jesus," he breathed and climbed down quickly. Victoria was unconscious, her skin burning with fever despite the coolness of the cellar. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her dress soiled and torn. Franklin gathered her into his arms, shocked at how light she was, how fragile she felt against his chest. He carried her up the ladder carefully, emerging into the bright afternoon sunlight. His horse nickered softly as he laid her in the shade of the house and ran to retrieve his canteen. "Come on now," Franklin said softly, lifting her head and dribbling water between her lips. "Come back. You are safe now." Victoria coughed, her eyes fluttering open. She could not focus at first, could not understand what she was seeing. A man's face hovered above her, strong and sun-darkened, with eyes that held genuine concern. She tried to speak, but only managed a croak. "Easy," he said. "Just small sips. That is it." The water was the most beautiful thing she had ever tasted. She drank greedily until he pulled the canteen away. "Not too much at once or you will be sick," Franklin said. He pulled a cloth from his saddlebag and wet it, then gently wiped her face. "How long were you down there?" "3 days," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He locked me in." Franklin's jaw tightened. "Who did?" But Victoria's eyes had closed again, her body surrendering to exhaustion now that safety had come. Franklin looked around the property, noting the main house 50 yards away, the barn, the other outbuildings. He needed to get her inside, cleaned up and properly cared for, but he also needed to know if whoever had locked her in that cellar was still nearby. He compromised by carrying her to the house, checking each room before settling her on a sofa in the parlor. The house appeared empty, but lived in. Through the windows, he could see the main street of North Platte in the distance. Franklin debated riding into town for a doctor, but decided against leaving her alone. Instead, he found the kitchen pump and brought more water, along with some bread he discovered in a tin. When Victoria woke again an hour later, she found herself clean and covered with a quilt. The stranger sat in a chair across from her, watching her with those careful blue eyes. She struggled to sit up. "Stay down," he said. "You need to rest." "Who are you?" Victoria asked. Her voice was stronger now, though still raspy. "Franklin Everett. I was tracking through the area and heard you." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Who locked you in that cellar?" Victoria felt tears sting her eyes as the memory flooded back. "My cousin's husband. Dale Pritchard. I saw him stealing from my uncle's store and he said I needed to learn to keep quiet." She looked around frantically. "Where is my aunt, my uncle? The house was empty when I found you, just you in that cellar. They must be in town at the store." Victoria tried to stand, but dizziness overwhelmed her. Franklin caught her before she fell, his strong hand steadying her. "You are not going anywhere right now," he said firmly, but not unkindly. "Tell me where this store is and I will fetch them." Victoria gave him directions to her uncle's general store on Main Street, and Franklin hesitated only a moment before leaving. He did not like abandoning her, even briefly, but she needed family around her. He rode into North Platte at a gallop, his horse's hooves kicking up dust on the dry road. The general store was easy to find. Franklin tied his horse outside and entered, finding a middle-aged couple behind the counter helping customers. The woman had the same auburn hair as Victoria, though streaked with gray. "Are you related to Victoria Ashford?" Franklin asked without preamble. The woman's face went white. "Yes, I am her aunt, Margaret Ashford. This is my husband, Henry. Have you seen her? She has been missing for 3 days. I found her locked in your root cellar. She is alive but needs care." Margaret let out a cry and grabbed her husband's arm. Within minutes, they had closed the store and were riding back with Franklin. On the way, they explained that Victoria had disappeared without a trace, that they had searched everywhere, that the sheriff had organized search parties that combed the prairie. Never once had they thought to check their own cellar because it was always left unlocked. "She said someone named Dale Pritchard locked her in," Franklin said, watching their reactions. Henry's face darkened with rage. "My nephew's husband. He has been trouble since the day Rebecca married him. If he has harmed Victoria, I will kill him myself." "The law will handle it," Franklin said, though privately he understood the sentiment. When they reached the house, Margaret rushed to Victoria's side, weeping and apologizing. Henry immediately rode back to town to fetch the doctor and the sheriff. Franklin stood awkwardly by, feeling like an intruder on a family matter, but Victoria's eyes kept finding him across the room. The doctor arrived and examined Victoria, declaring her dehydrated and undernourished but likely to make a full recovery with rest and proper care. The sheriff, a grizzled man named Tom Dawson, took her statement while she lay on the sofa, her aunt holding her hand. Victoria told him everything about Dale's theft from the store and his threats. When she described being locked in the cellar, her voice shook but did not break. Sheriff Dawson turned to Franklin. "You are the one who found her?" "Yes, sir. I was tracking through and heard something in the cellar." "Lucky thing. Another day and we might have been too late." The sheriff stood. "I am going to bring Dale Pritchard in. Henry, you have my word he will face justice." After the sheriff left, Margaret insisted on preparing food for everyone. Franklin tried to excuse himself, saying he needed to continue his tracking work, but Victoria spoke up from the sofa. "Please stay," she said. "I want to thank you properly." So Franklin stayed for dinner, sitting at the table with the Ashfords and eating the best meal he had had in months. Margaret kept piling more food on his plate, thanking him between every bite. Henry asked about his tracking work, his family, his life. Franklin found himself talking more than he usually did, perhaps because they were genuinely interested, or perhaps because he kept glancing at Victoria on the sofa and seeing the grateful warmth in her eyes. After dinner, Margaret helped Victoria upstairs to bed. Henry offered Franklin a room for the night, and Franklin accepted, too tired to ride back to the boarding house where he had been staying in town. He lay in the small guest room, listening to the sounds of the house settling, and thought about the young woman he had pulled from that cellar. She had spirit, that was clear. Most people would have been completely broken by such an ordeal, but Victoria had maintained her composure, told her story clearly, and even now seemed more concerned about her family than herself. The next morning, Franklin woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. He dressed and went downstairs to find Margaret cooking and Victoria sitting at the kitchen table, looking much better despite the exhaustion still evident in her face. "Good morning," Victoria said, and smiled. It transformed her entire face, chasing away the haunted look from the day before. "Morning," Franklin replied, accepting a cup of coffee from Margaret. "How are you feeling?" "Sore and tired, but grateful to be alive." "Thanks to you," Victoria hesitated. "I never properly thanked you yesterday." "You saved my life, Mr. Everett." "Franklin," he corrected. "And you do not need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same." "But you were the one who did," she said softly. They held each other's gaze for a long moment before Margaret broke the spell by setting plates of food in front of them. Henry came in from the barn and reported that the horses had been fed. Over breakfast, they discussed the situation with Dale Pritchard. Henry had learned from a neighbor that the sheriff had arrested Dale the previous evening. He would be held in jail until the circuit judge arrived in 2 weeks to hear the case. "Rebecca is beside herself," Margaret said sadly. "She came by the store last night, crying and claiming Dale would never do such a thing. She has always been blind to his faults," Henry muttered. "Even when he drinks away their money or stays out all night." Victoria pushed her food around her plate. "I hate that this is tearing the family apart." "This is not your fault," Franklin said firmly. "A man who would lock a woman in a cellar to die is responsible for his own actions." After breakfast, Franklin prepared to leave. He had already spent more time here than he should have, and the trail of the horse thief was growing colder by the hour. Victoria walked out with him to where his horse was tethered. "Will you be staying in North Platte long?" she asked. "I do not know. Depends on whether I can pick up the trail again." He checked his saddle, not looking at her. "I hope you do," Victoria said. "Stay, I mean, and find whoever you are looking for." Franklin turned to face her fully. In the morning light, he could see the freckles across her nose, the intelligence in her green eyes, the determination in the set of her jaw. She was beautiful, but it was more than that. There was something about her that made him want to stay, to know her better, to hear her laugh and see her smile. "I will be in town for a while yet," he found himself saying. "Have to give testimony at the trial anyway." Victoria's face brightened. "Then perhaps I will see you again." "Perhaps you will." But perhaps turned into certainly over the following days. Franklin found reasons to stop by the general store where Victoria had returned to work once her strength came back. He needed supplies, he told himself. Ammunition, coffee, a new rope. Each time Victoria was there, helping customers or restocking shelves. They would talk while she wrapped his purchases, conversations that started with pleasantries and grew deeper with each encounter. He learned that she had moved to North Platte 3 years ago after her parents died of typhoid in Missouri. That she loved books but rarely had time to read them. That she dreamed of opening her own business someday, being independent. That she had a good head for numbers and often kept the books for her uncle's store. She learned that he had grown up on a ranch in Wyoming, that he had loved that life before the bank took it, that he had taught himself to track by following his father through the wilderness as a child, that he was good at being alone but sometimes wondered what it would be like to have a home again, that he had never stayed in one place longer than a few weeks since he was 18 years old. "That sounds lonely," Victoria said one afternoon as she measured out flour for him. "It is what it is," Franklin replied. "The work keeps me moving." "But do you like it? Or is it just what you fell into?" No one had ever asked him that before. Franklin considered the question seriously. "Both, I suppose. I am good at it and it pays. But if I had a choice, I would rather be raising horses like my father did." "Then why do you not?" "Takes money to buy land and stock. Money I do not have," he shrugged. "Maybe someday." Victoria tied up his package with string, her nimble fingers working quickly. "Someday is not a plan. It is an excuse," he laughed, surprised by her directness. "You always speak your mind like that. My mother used to say it was my best and worst quality." She handed him the package. "I figure if you do not say what you mean, people cannot know what you are thinking." "Fair enough." Franklin paid for his purchases and tipped his hat. "Until next time, Miss Ashford." "Victoria," she corrected, echoing his own words from days before. "And I hope there will be a next time, Franklin." He found himself thinking about her constantly. When he was out on the prairie, checking old campsite locations and abandoned buildings for signs of the horse thief, Victoria's face would appear in his mind. Her smile, her laugh, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking. It was distracting and unsettling and wonderful all at once. Franklin had known women before, had even fancied himself in love once when he was 20. But that had been a shallow thing compared to what he was starting to feel for Victoria. She had a strength in her that matched the softness, a resilience forged by hardship. She understood loss because she had experienced it, and there was an easiness between them, a natural compatibility that made talking to her feel like coming home. 2 weeks after he had found her in the cellar, Franklin finally caught a break in his tracking case. A rancher reported seeing a man matching the horse thief's description heading north toward the Wyoming border. Franklin rode out immediately, following the lead for 3 days before he found his man camped by a creek with the stolen mare tethered nearby. The confrontation was brief. The thief, a young man named Billy Saunders, had more bravado than sense. When he reached for his gun, Franklin was faster, putting a bullet through Billy's shoulder before he could clear leather. He tied up the wounded thief and rode him back to North Platte, where he turned him over to Sheriff Dawson and collected his bounty. "Good work," the sheriff said, counting out the money. "That is some fine tracking." "Thank you, sir." Franklin pocketed the bills and coins. It was a decent sum, enough to keep him going for a few months if he was careful. "You thinking of moving on soon?" Sheriff Dawson asked. "Because I could use a deputy if you are interested. The last one ran off to California chasing gold." Franklin hesitated. A steady job, a place to stay, a reason to remain in North Platte. All tempting offers, especially now. "Can I think on it?" "Sure. Let me know by the end of the week." Franklin walked out of the sheriff's office into the late afternoon sun. Main Street was busy with people finishing their errands before supper time. He spotted Victoria coming out of the general store, a basket over her arm. She saw him at the same moment and her face lit up. "Franklin, I heard you caught the man you were tracking. News travels fast." "In a town this size, always." She fell into step beside him. "Does this mean you will be leaving, maybe? The sheriff offered me a deputy position." Victoria stopped walking. "What did you say?" "I said I would think about it." He turned to face her. "What do you think I should do?" "That depends on what you want." Her voice was careful, neutral. "I want to stop running," Franklin said, the words coming out before he could think better of them. "I want to build something permanent, and I want to get to know you better, Victoria Ashford, if you will let me." Her eyes widened, and then that beautiful smile spread across her face. "I would like that very much. So I should take the deputy job. I think you should do what makes you happy. But yes, I hope you will stay." She glanced around at the people passing by, then lowered her voice. "I've been hoping you would stay since the first day you carried me out of that cellar." Franklin felt warmth spread through his chest. "I will talk to the sheriff tomorrow then." "Good." Victoria adjusted her basket. "Will you come for dinner tonight? Aunt Margaret has been asking after you, and I think she wants to feed you again." "I would not want to impose. You saved my life. You could impose every day for the rest of yours, and we would still be in your debt." Her expression turned serious. "Besides, I want you there, please." "Then I will be there." Dinner at the Ashford home that evening was a warm, lively affair. Margaret had prepared a feast, and Henry broke out a bottle of whiskey he had been saving. They toasted Franklin's successful capture of the horse thief, and then Henry toasted Franklin himself for saving Victoria. The praise made Franklin uncomfortable, but he accepted it graciously. After dinner, Victoria suggested they sit on the front porch to enjoy the evening air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. They sat in rocking chairs, comfortable in the silence between them. "I have been thinking about what you said," Victoria finally spoke, "about wanting to raise horses again." "What about it?" "There is land available not far from here. Old man Patterson died last winter and his son does not want the ranch. It is not big, maybe 40 acres, but it has good grazing and water rights. She was not looking at him, her gaze fixed on the horizon. If you took the deputy job and saved your money, you could maybe afford it in a year or two. You have been thinking about this a lot, Franklin observed. I think about a lot of things. Now she did look at him, and in the fading light her eyes were very green. Mostly I think about what it would be like if you stayed. Franklin reached over and took her hand. Her fingers were small in his, but her grip was strong. I am going to stay. Promise? I promise. The circuit judge arrived in North Platte the following week, and the trial of Dale Pritchard began. The whole town turned out for it, packing the small courthouse. Victoria gave her testimony clearly and calmly, describing the theft she had witnessed and Dale's threats, then the 3 days in the cellar. Franklin testified to finding her and the condition she had been in. The doctor described her injuries and state of dehydration. The evidence was overwhelming. Dale's defense was weak. He claimed Victoria was lying, that she had locked herself in the cellar by accident. His lawyer argued there was no proof Dale had been the one to lock her in. But when Henry Ashford testified about the money missing from his store that matched exactly what Dale had been seen spending at the saloon, and when other townspeople came forward with stories of Dale's drinking and violence, the jury took less than an hour to find him guilty. The judge sentenced Dale Pritchard to 10 years in the territorial prison for attempted murder and theft. Rebecca, Dale's wife and Victoria's cousin, left the courthouse weeping. Margaret tried to comfort her, but Rebecca pushed her away and disappeared down the street. It was a sad ending to a sad situation. That evening, Franklin took Victoria for a walk along the river that ran past town. The water moved slowly in the late summer heat, and cottonwood trees provided shade along the banks. "How are you feeling?" Franklin asked. "Relieved, mostly." "Glad it is over." Victoria picked up a smooth stone and tossed it into the water. Sad for Rebecca, though, she loved him despite everything. Love does not excuse what he did, I know, but it makes it harder for her. Victoria sighed. She will have to live with people knowing her husband tried to kill her cousin. In a town this small, that kind of shame does not fade. That is not her shame to carry, it is his. You are right. She turned to him. Thank you for being there today. It helped knowing you were in the courtroom. I would not have been anywhere else. They walked further, following the path along the water. Birds called from the trees, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. It was peaceful, the kind of moment Franklin had rarely experienced in his years of constant travel. He realized he wanted more moments like this, wanted them with Victoria beside him. I accepted the deputy position, he said. Officially. I start next week. Victoria stopped and turned to him, her face radiant with joy. Franklin, that is wonderful. I also went to look at the Patterson ranch you mentioned. You were right, it is good land. I talked to the son and he is willing to sell for a fair price. He took both her hands in his. I know this is fast and maybe I should wait longer before saying this, but I do not believe in wasting time. These past few weeks with you have meant more to me than the past 8 years of wandering. I want to build a life here, and I want to build it with you if you will have me. Tears filled Victoria's eyes, but she was smiling. Are you asking what I think you are asking? I am asking if you will let me court you properly. Let me take you to church socials and dances. Let me earn the right to ask your uncle for your hand. I am asking for a chance to prove I can be the kind of man you deserve. You already are that man, Victoria said softly. She squeezed his hands. Yes, yes to all of it. Franklin pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. She fit against him perfectly, her head tucked under his chin. He could smell the lavender soap she used in her hair and feel the warmth of her body through the fabric of her dress. In that moment, holding her beside the river as the sun set over North Platte, Franklin felt something he had not felt in years. He felt like he had come home. The courtship that followed was the subject of much discussion in North Platte. Franklin was seen as a hero for saving Victoria, and their romance was viewed as a natural and happy consequence. Margaret enthusiastically approved, and Henry took Franklin aside one evening to tell him that he thought of Victoria as the daughter he never had, and that he could not imagine a better man for her. Franklin threw himself into his new job as deputy. Sheriff Dawson proved to be a good teacher, showing him the administrative side of law work in addition to the physical aspects. Franklin was good at both, his tracking skills making him particularly effective at finding lost cattle or tracking down petty thieves. He earned respect quickly, and people began to nod to him on the street, to greet him by name. In his spare time, he courted Victoria. They attended barn dances where he held her close during the slow songs and spun her until she laughed during the fast ones. They went on picnics by the river, sharing food and conversation and stolen kisses when no one was looking. They attended church together on Sundays, sitting with her aunt and uncle, singing hymns side by side. Franklin also began planning for the future. He saved every penny he could from his deputy salary, adding it to the bounty money he had put away. He visited the Patterson ranch regularly, walking the land and imagining what he could do with it. He talked to other ranchers about breeding stock, about the best types of horses to raise in Nebraska, about markets and buyers. Victoria supported his dreams wholeheartedly. She helped him create a budget, showing him how long it would take to save enough for the down payment on the land. She listened to his ideas about building a house, about where to place the barn and corrals. She offered suggestions and asked questions that made him think more carefully about his plans. Together, they dreamed of the future. 6 months after Franklin had pulled Victoria from that cellar, he asked Henry Ashford for permission to marry her. They were in the back room of the general store, doing inventory. Henry had been expecting the question and gave his blessing immediately, along with a bear hug that nearly cracked Franklin's ribs. "She loves you," Henry said. "Anyone with eyes can see it, and you are good for her. You make her happy." "She makes me happy too," Franklin replied. "Happier than I knew I could be." "Then you have my blessing and my best wishes. When will you ask her?" "Tonight, if she will have me." Franklin had a ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond that had cost him 2 months of savings. He carried it in his pocket all day, feeling its weight there like a promise. That evening he took Victoria back to the river where he had first told her he wanted to court her. The autumn air was crisp, and leaves crunched under their feet as they walked. "You are nervous," Victoria observed. "I can tell." "How can you tell? You keep touching your pocket right here." She tapped his chest. "What is in there?" Franklin stopped walking and took a deep breath. "A question." "What kind of question?" Instead of answering, he dropped to one knee. Victoria's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes going wide. Franklin pulled out the ring, holding it up to catch the last rays of sunlight. "Victoria Ashford, I was lost before I found you. I was just drifting, going wherever the wind took me, with no real purpose or plan. You gave me a reason to stay, to put down roots, to build something lasting. You gave me hope for a future I thought I would never have. I love you with everything I am, and I promise to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you have made me. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Victoria's face as she nodded. "Yes. Yes, Franklin, I will marry you." He stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms and kissed her properly for the first time. It was everything a first kiss should be, sweet and passionate and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "I love you," Victoria said. "I have loved you since you carried me out of that cellar and looked at me like I mattered. You do matter, more than anything." They walked back to the house hand in hand, eager to share their news. Margaret cried happy tears and immediately began planning the wedding. Henry shook Franklin's hand and welcomed him officially to the family. They celebrated with cake and coffee, talking late into the night about dates and details. The wedding was set for the following spring, giving them time to prepare and for Franklin to save more money. Victoria worked with her aunt to sew her wedding dress, a beautiful creation of white lace and satin. Franklin continued his deputy work and his visits to the Patterson Ranch, finalizing the details of the purchase. He would buy the land right after the wedding, and they would start their married life working together to build the horse ranch. The months passed quickly, filled with preparation and anticipation. Franklin moved his few belongings into a small house he rented in town, wanting to establish a proper home before the wedding. Victoria helped him furnish it with items from the general store and pieces her aunt and uncle contributed. It was modest but comfortable, and it would serve until they could build on the ranch land. Winter came to North Platte, bringing snow and cold winds. Franklin spent long hours on patrol, checking on families in outlying areas to make sure they had enough supplies to last through the storms. Victoria worried about him when he was gone, and the joy on her face when he returned safely, each time, made him fall even more deeply in love with her. Christmas was a special celebration that year. Franklin had never had much family, but the Ashfords welcomed him completely. They attended church on Christmas Eve, sang carols, and exchanged small gifts. Franklin gave Victoria a leather-bound journal for recording her thoughts and dreams. She gave him a hand-knit scarf in deep blue that matched his eyes. They held hands under the table during dinner and stole moments alone whenever they could, counting down the days until their wedding. In February, tragedy struck when Sheriff Dawson was killed breaking up a fight at the saloon. A drunk cowhand had pulled a knife, and the sheriff had taken a blade to the gut trying to disarm him. He died 2 days later from infection. The whole town mourned, and Franklin delivered the eulogy at the funeral, his voice steady despite his grief. The town council immediately offered Franklin the position of sheriff. He was hesitant, knowing it meant more responsibility and more danger, but Victoria encouraged him to accept. "You are good at this work," she told him. "You help people keep them safe. That matters." "But what if something happens to me? What if I leave you a widow before we are even properly married?" Victoria took his face in her hands. "Life does not come with guarantees, Franklin. Something could happen to either of us at any time. But I would rather have one day with you as my husband than a lifetime without you. Take the job. Do the work you are meant to do. I will be here waiting when you come home each night." So Franklin became Sheriff Franklin Everett of North Platte, Nebraska, at the age of 27. It was more than he had ever imagined for himself during those wandering years. He hired a new deputy, a young man named Samuel who was eager to learn. Together they kept the peace in town and the surrounding area. Spring arrived with a rush of warm air and blooming wildflowers. The wedding date approached rapidly, and the whole town seemed to be involved in the preparations. Women brought food for the reception. Men helped set up tables and chairs in the church hall. Children practiced throwing flower petals and rice. It felt like the entire community was celebrating with them. The night before the wedding, Franklin could barely sleep. He lay in his small house, thinking about how his life had changed in less than a year. He had gone from a solitary drifter with no real purpose to a man with a home, a job, a future, and a woman he loved beyond measure. All because he had stopped to investigate a sound in a cellar on a hot August day. The wedding took place on a perfect April morning in 1878. The church was packed with people, every pew filled. Franklin stood at the altar in a new suit, his heart pounding as he waited. Then the organ began to play and Victoria appeared at the back of the church on her uncle's arm, and Franklin forgot to breathe. She was radiant in her white dress, her auburn hair pinned up with small flowers woven through it. Her eyes found his across the distance, and the smile she gave him was brighter than the sun streaming through the stained glass windows. Henry walked her down the aisle, placed her hand in Franklin's, and stepped back with tears in his eyes. The ceremony was traditional and beautiful. They spoke their vows clearly, promising to love, honor, and cherish each other for the rest of their lives. Franklin slipped a matching gold band onto Victoria's finger, and she did the same for him. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Franklin kissed his bride with all the love in his heart, and the congregation cheered. The reception lasted well into the evening. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, toasts and well wishes. Franklin danced with his wife, marveling at how right it felt to call her that. Victoria glowed with happiness, accepting congratulations from everyone in town. As the sun set, Franklin and Victoria slipped away to their small house. Someone had decorated it with ribbons and flowers, and the lanterns inside cast a warm glow. Franklin carried Victoria over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition. "Hello, Mrs. Everett," Franklin said, setting her down gently. "Hello, Mr. Everett," Victoria replied, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I rather like the sound of that, so do I." That night they came together as husband and wife, learning each other with tenderness and passion. Franklin was gentle, mindful that this was new for Victoria, and she responded with trust and growing confidence. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, talking quietly about their dreams and plans. "We are going to have a good life," Victoria said sleepily. "The best life," Franklin agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. The next morning they began their married life in earnest. Victoria moved her belongings into the house, and they spent the day arranging everything to suit them both. It felt like playing house, except it was real and permanent and theirs. Within a week, they had officially purchased the Patterson Ranch. Franklin took Victoria out to see the land as his wife for the first time, showing her where he wanted to build their real home, pointing out the best grazing areas, discussing plans for breeding stock. "We will start small," Franklin said. "Maybe a dozen horses the first year, see how we do. I can work on it in the evenings and on my days off, and you can help when the store does not need you." "What if I did not work at the store anymore?" Victoria asked. "What if I helped you full-time with the ranch?" Franklin considered this. "Would you want that?" "I know you love working with your uncle. I love the idea of building something with you more." She squeezed his hand. "This is our dream now together. I want to be part of it from the start." So Victoria gave notice at the general store, and Henry and Margaret understood completely. They were proud of the young couple and excited to see what they would build together. Margaret made Victoria promise to come visit regularly, and Henry offered to help with the ranch whenever they needed an extra pair of hands. The work was hard but satisfying. Franklin and Victoria spent long days clearing land, mending fences, building a barn and corral. They worked side by side in the spring sunshine, and Franklin found himself constantly amazed by his wife's strength and determination. She could handle a hammer as well as he could, and she had ideas about the layout and design that improved his original plans. By summer, they had purchased their first breeding horses, a mare and stallion with excellent bloodlines. Franklin also bought several young horses to train and sell. He discovered that Victoria had a natural gift with animals. They trusted her instincts, calmed under her touch. Together, they made a formidable team. Money was tight those first months as they invested everything into the ranch. They lived simply, eating what they grew and hunted, wearing clothes until they were patched beyond repair. But they were happy, happier than either had ever been. Every evening, they would sit on the porch of their small ranch house and watch the sun set over land that belonged to them, building something lasting together. In September, Victoria realized she was pregnant. She had been tired and queasy for weeks, and when she finally admitted her suspicion to Franklin, his face went through a dozen emotions in as many seconds. Shock, joy, fear, and then pure elation settled on his features. "A baby," he breathed, pulling her close. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Victoria laughed, crying happy tears. "We are going to be parents." Franklin knelt and pressed his ear to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, this is your father. I cannot wait to meet you." Victoria ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed with love for this man who had saved her life, and then given her a new one, better than anything she could have imagined. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Victoria continued helping with the ranch work as long as she could, though Franklin became increasingly protective as she grew bigger. He fussed over her, making sure she rested enough, ate properly, did not lift anything too heavy. It drove Victoria crazy and made her love him even more. Margaret helped prepare for the baby's arrival, sewing tiny clothes and knitting blankets. Henry built a cradle from oak wood, sanding it smooth as glass. The whole community was excited about the baby, asking after Victoria whenever they saw Franklin in town. On a cold night in March of 1879, Victoria went into labor. Margaret came to help, and Franklin rode for the doctor, nearly killing his horse in his haste. The labor was long and difficult, and Franklin paced outside the bedroom like a caged animal, jumping at every sound. Finally, as dawn broke over the prairie, a baby's cry rang out. Franklin burst into the room to find Victoria exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of Margaret's blankets. "It is a boy," Victoria said softly. "We have a son." Franklin approached slowly, reverently, and looked down at his child for the first time. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and his eyes were scrunched shut as he wailed his displeasure at being born. Franklin felt his heart crack open in a way he had not known was possible. "He is perfect," Franklin whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you." They named him James Henry Everett after Victoria's father and her uncle. Jamie, as they quickly began calling him, was a loud, demanding baby who kept them up at night and filled their days with wonder. Franklin discovered that he loved being a father even more than he had anticipated. He would hold Jamie for hours, talking to him about the ranch and the horses, about all the things they would do together when Jamie was older. Victoria blossomed as a mother. Despite the exhaustion, despite the constant demands, she was happier than ever. She would nurse Jamie while watching the ranch operations through the window, already planning for the future. As Jamie grew from infant to baby to toddler, the ranch grew too. Their horse breeding program was successful, and they developed a reputation for quality stock. Franklin's work as sheriff provided steady income while the ranch became established. They hired a hand to help with the daily work, a reliable man named Peter who lived in a small cabin on the property. When Jamie was 2, Victoria became pregnant again. This time Franklin knew what to expect, though he was no less worried. Their second son, Thomas Franklin Everett, was born on a warm July evening in 1881, easier and faster than his brother. Tommy was a quieter baby than Jamie had been, content to watch the world with solemn eyes. With 2 young sons and a growing ranch, life was busy and full. Franklin still worked as sheriff, but he began training Samuel to take over more responsibilities, knowing that he wanted to focus increasingly on the ranch. Victoria managed the household, the children, and the business side of the ranch, keeping meticulous records of breeding lines, sales, and expenses. The years flowed by, marked by the seasons and the small milestones of family life. Jamie's first words and first steps. Tommy learning to walk and then run, chasing after his older brother. The boys learning to ride, first on gentle old horses and then on increasingly spirited mounts. Birthday celebrations and Christmas mornings. Summer days by the river and winter evenings around the fireplace. When Jamie was 5 and Tommy was 3, Victoria became pregnant for a 3rd time. She laughed when she told Franklin, both of them standing in the barn after putting the boys to bed. "We are going to need a bigger house," she said. "I will start building this spring," Franklin promised. "Something with enough rooms for all these children and any more that might come along." "You want more." "I want whatever life gives us." He kissed her forehead. "As long as I have you, I have everything." Their daughter, Elizabeth Margaret Everett, arrived in the spring of 1884. She had her mother's auburn hair and her father's blue eyes, and both boys instantly adored their baby sister. Jamie appointed himself her protector, and Tommy insisted on helping with everything from diaper changes to feeding. Franklin finished the new house that summer, a large 2-story structure with a wide porch and room to grow. Moving from their small cabin into the new house felt like a culmination of everything they had worked for. Victoria stood in the spacious kitchen and cried happy tears, remembering the root cellar where she had nearly died, marveling at how far they had come. In 1885, Franklin officially retired as sheriff and turned the job over to Samuel, who had proven himself capable and trustworthy. Franklin was 44 years old and ready to focus entirely on the ranch and his family. The horse breeding operation had become successful enough to support them comfortably, and they were respected members of the North Platte community. As the children grew, they became integral parts of the ranch operations. Jamie, serious and responsible, helped with training the horses. Tommy, creative and mechanical, was always improving equipment or finding better ways to do things. Elizabeth, spirited and fearless, could ride better than most adults by the time she was 8. Victoria and Franklin watched their children grow with pride and amazement. In the evenings, after the work was done and the children were in bed, they would sit together on the porch of their home, holding hands and talking about everything and nothing. "You ever think about that day?" Victoria asked one evening when she was 33 and Franklin was 46. "When you found me in the cellar, sometimes," Franklin admitted. "I think about what would have happened if I had ridden a different direction that day, if I had not stopped to investigate, if I had been 10 minutes later." "I would have died," Victoria said simply, "but you did stop. You did save me, and you gave me this life, this beautiful life that I never could have imagined. You gave me just as much." Franklin squeezed her hand. "More even. Before you, I was just existing. You taught me how to live." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the prairie night. An owl hooted in the distance. Horses moved in the corral. Inside the house, one of the children called out in their sleep and then settled again. "I am so grateful," Victoria said softly, "for all of it. The hardship and the happiness, the struggles and the triumphs. I would not change a single moment because it all led us here." "Neither would I," Franklin agreed. As the years continued to pass, the Everett Ranch became one of the most successful in the region. Their horses were sought after throughout Nebraska and Wyoming. Jamie grew into a fine young man who eventually took over much of the daily operations. Tommy went to study engineering in Omaha, but came back to apply his knowledge to the ranch. Elizabeth married a neighboring rancher's son, a good man who treated her well and built a house just a mile down the road. Franklin and Victoria became grandparents, doting on their grandchildren the way their own children had been doted upon. They watched their family grow and spread while remaining rooted in the land they had built together. In the summer of 1901, Franklin and Victoria celebrated their 23rd wedding anniversary. They were both in their 50s now, their hair touched with gray, their faces lined with years of hard work and laughter. They held a large celebration at the ranch, with their children and grandchildren, their friends and neighbors, all gathered to honor the couple who had become a cornerstone of the North Platte community. That evening, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, Franklin and Victoria walked out to the place where they had first broken ground on the ranch so many years ago. The moon was full, casting silver light across the prairie. "We did it," Victoria said, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "Everything we dreamed of and more." "We did," Franklin agreed, "and I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "Even the 3 days I spent in that cellar?" Victoria asked, a hint of teasing in her voice. "Especially that, because it brought you to me." Franklin turned to face her, cupping her face in his weathered hands. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Victoria Everett, my rescuer just as much as I was yours." "I love you," she said, the same words she had spoken countless times over the years, and yet they still held all the power and magic of the first time. "I love you too," Franklin replied, and kissed his wife under the stars. They stood there together, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life from nothing, who had raised a family and created a legacy. Two people who had proven that sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest futures, and that true love, once found, could weather any storm. The ranch continued to thrive for many more years. Franklin and Victoria eventually turned full control over to Jamie, while remaining active participants in the daily life of the place they had created. They became the beloved patriarch and matriarch of a growing family, their love story told and retold to grandchildren and great-grandchildren who would grow up on the same land. When Franklin passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, Victoria was holding his hand. He had lived a full and happy life, surrounded by love, his last words a whispered "I love you" to the woman who had made it all possible. Victoria mourned him deeply, but found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the legacy they had built together, in the memories of nearly 4 decades as his wife. She lived another 5 years, active and engaged right up until the end. She spent her final days in the house Franklin had built, surrounded by family, telling stories of the early days and the cowboy who had broken down a cellar door and changed her life forever. When she died at 75, it was with a smile on her face and peace in her heart, knowing she had lived fully and loved completely. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple headstones that read Franklin Everett, beloved husband, father, grandfather, and Victoria Everett, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. But their real memorial was the thriving ranch that continued for generations, the family that carried on their values and work ethic, and the love story that became legend in North Platte, Nebraska. The tale of the woman locked in a root cellar for 3 days, and the cowboy who broke down the door and held her close, became a story told around dinner tables and at family gatherings, a reminder that love can be found in the most unlikely places, that rescue comes in many forms, and that a single moment of kindness can change everything. It became a testament to the power of resilience, the importance of second chances, and the enduring strength of two hearts that beat as one. Franklin and Victoria's legacy lived on not just in their descendants, but in the very fabric of the community they had helped build. The ranch they started continued to produce quality horses. The family they raised continued to contribute to North Platte and the surrounding area. And the love they shared continued to inspire, a beacon of hope and proof that even in the hardest times, in the wildest places, true love can not only survive but flourish. Their story was one of transformation, of two lost souls finding their way to each other and building something beautiful from the ashes of their separate tragedies. Franklin, who had lost his family's ranch and spent years wandering without purpose, found his purpose in Victoria. Victoria, who had lost her parents and nearly lost her own life, found not just survival but joy beyond measure. Together, they proved that the greatest adventures are not about how far you travel, but about who you travel with and what you build along the way. On warm summer evenings, when the wind blew just right across the prairie, locals would swear they could still feel the presence of Franklin and Victoria Everett on the land they had loved, in the home they had built, among the horses they had raised. It was as if their love had become part of the very soil, enriching it and making it fertile for future generations. The old cellar where Victoria had been trapped was eventually filled in, but a marker was placed there noting the spot where her ordeal had taken place and where Franklin had found her. It became a reminder to the family of how precious life is, how quickly circumstances can change, and how important it is to hold tight to the people you love. Franklin and Victoria's children often reflected on their parents' story, marveling at the courage it took to build a life from nothing, at the dedication required to maintain a marriage through good times and bad, at the love that had sustained them through decades. They tried to pass these lessons on to their own children, creating a family culture rooted in hard work, integrity, and devotion. The Everett Ranch became known throughout the region not just for quality horses, but for the values it represented. Other ranchers would point to Franklin and Victoria's example when talking about what it took to succeed on the frontier, about the importance of partnership in marriage, about treating people fairly and with respect. Their reputation extended far beyond what they could have imagined during those early, difficult years. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, and the Wild West became more civilized, the Everett Ranch adapted but never lost sight of its foundations. The same principles that Franklin and Victoria had established continued to guide the family's decisions. The same dedication to quality and integrity remained paramount, and the same emphasis on family and love stayed at the center of everything. In later years, historians studying the settlement of Nebraska would sometimes come across records of Sheriff Franklin Everett and his wife Victoria, of their successful horse ranch and their large family. These scholars would note them as examples of the kind of industrious, resilient pioneers who had helped build the American West. But they could never fully capture in their dry academic texts the depth of emotion, the strength of character, or the power of love that had truly defined Franklin and Victoria's lives. The truth was that Franklin and Victoria Everett were not extraordinary because they were particularly wealthy or famous or powerful. They were extraordinary because they took the ordinary circumstances of frontier life and infused them with purpose, with love, with determination. They were extraordinary because they saw potential in a harsh land and in each other, and they worked every day to realize that potential. They were extraordinary because they never gave up, never stopped believing, never stopped loving. Their story was not one of instant transformation or easy success. It was a story of two people who met under terrible circumstances, who fell in love gradually and deeply, who built a life together one day at a time, one decision at a time, one act of love at a time. It was a story of patience and persistence, of faith and fortitude, of the kind of quiet heroism that goes unnoticed in the moment but shines brightly in retrospect. And at the heart of it all was that singular moment when Franklin Everett had heard a faint sound from a root cellar and had made the choice to investigate. That moment of curiosity, of compassion, of willingness to help a stranger had set in motion a chain of events that would echo through generations. It had saved a life, sparked a love, created a family, built a legacy. Victoria often said in her later years that being locked in that cellar was the worst and best thing that ever happened to her. The worst because of the fear and suffering she had endured. The best because it had brought Franklin into her life. She never viewed herself as a victim but as a survivor, and more than that, as someone who had been given a second chance at life and had made the most of it. Franklin, for his part, always maintained that he was the lucky one. He had been drifting, purposeless and alone, until that day. Finding Victoria had given him a reason to stop drifting and start living. She had given him a home, a family, a future. In saving her life, he had saved his own in a different but equally important way. Their love story became a touchstone for the family, referenced whenever someone faced difficulty or doubt. If great-grandma could survive 3 days in a cellar and great-grandpa could build a ranch from nothing, we can handle this, became a common refrain. Franklin and Victoria's example gave their descendants courage in their own trials, hope in their own struggles. The ranch itself stood as a physical testament to their love and labor. Every fence post Franklin had set, every garden Victoria had planted, every building they had constructed together remained as proof that dreams could become reality with enough work and dedication. Walking the property meant walking in their footsteps, literally and figuratively. As modern times brought changes to North Platte and the surrounding area, the Everett Ranch adapted but never lost its essential character. The family honored Franklin and Victoria's memory by maintaining the standards they had set, by treating their animals with the same care, by dealing with customers with the same honesty, by loving each other with the same devotion. And so the legacy continued, generation after generation, an unbroken line stretching from that hot August day in 1877, when a cowboy broke down a cellar door and held a frightened woman close, promising her she was safe now, not knowing that he was making a promise that would extend far beyond that moment, a promise that would shape lives and hearts for over a century to come. The story of Franklin and Victoria Everett became more than just a family history. It became a legend, a romance, a testament to the power of love to transform lives and create meaning out of suffering. It became proof that sometimes the darkest moments precede the brightest dawns, that rescue can come from unexpected sources, and that when two hearts find each other against all odds, they can create something that endures forever. Their love had been tested by hardship, strengthened by adversity, and proven through decades of partnership. It had produced children and grandchildren who carried forward their values. It had created a prosperous enterprise that benefited the entire community. It had enriched 2 lives beyond measure and touched countless others in the process. In the end, Franklin and Victoria's story was a simple one, really. 2 people met, fell in love, built a life together, raised a family, and lived happily ever after. But in the living of it, In the daily choices to love and work and hope and persevere, they had created something remarkable. They had proven that ordinary people living ordinary lives with extraordinary love could leave an indelible mark on the world. And it had all started with 3 days in a root cellar, a broken door, and a cowboy who had chosen to investigate a faint sound on a hot summer day. Sometimes the smallest choices lead to the biggest consequences. Sometimes a moment of compassion can echo through eternity. Sometimes love finds you in the darkest places and lifts you into the light. Franklin and Victoria Everett knew all of this to be true because they had lived it. And their story, passed down through generations, continued to inspire and remind their descendants that love is always worth fighting for, that second chances should never be wasted, and that the greatest legacy anyone can leave is a life well lived and a love that never dies.